We clearly have not had the political will in this country to impeach George W. Bush.
Right.
Something that I have been complaining about, particularly after the Democrats took over in 2006. I felt that there was more than enough time to start and to complete an impeachment investigation and to write up articles of impeachment. We haven't done that. This is a different, this would require a different mechanism. This doesn't require political will. This requires basically courage from one prosecutor.
At least one prosecutor. And there's 1,000 out there, by the way. 950 DAs, 50 attorney generals.
And what would create jurisdiction is the fact that in virtually every one of these jurisdictions, someone of our men and women have died as a result of the Iraq War.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've established, well, on a federal level, the U.S. attorney could prosecute.
Of course,
right. But there's really only one federal attorney. I mean, there's 93 U.S. attorneys around the country, one here in L.A., but they would never, theoretically they could do it, but they would never prosecute Bush without getting the consent of their boss in Washington, D.C. So we're only talking about one prosecutor on a federal level, U.S. Attorney General, Washington, D.C., operating through his Department of Justice. But on a state level, Barry, I've established jurisdiction for the Attorney General in each of the 50 states, plus the approximately 950 district attorneys in counties within those states, to prosecute Bush for the murder of any soldier or soldiers from their state or county who died fighting Bush's war in Iraq. With all those prosecutors out there, and with all the evidence of guilt that I present against Bush, I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that there's at least one prosecutor out there, maybe many more, who's courageous enough to say, hey, this is the United States of America. In America, no man is above the law, so I'm going to go against George Bush, bring about justice for the American people. There's no statute of limitations for the crime of murder.
Now, also, this would be an American trial.
Absolutely, American courtroom, absolutely.
Right, because, as you pointed out, even though he may be guilty of war crimes, he would have to be brought before the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and they don't have jurisdiction.
No, because the United States was not a signatory nation to the agreement forming the ICC in Rome in 2002, so there's no jurisdiction there.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the case. Obviously, you're not saying that every president that takes us to war is criminally liable for murder.
Absolutely.
So you're obviously not saying that. So, murder requires a certain, I learned in law school, I guess it's the mens rea. It requires a certain level of a mental state of mind. And it requires malice aforethought, which doesn't really mean malice in that sense.
It gets very complex. What does malice mean? And we could talk about that for 10 or 15 minutes.
Which we probably shouldn't.
But I do that in the book. But I can tell you this, to jump over all of that. The main legal issue, if this case ever went to trial, would be whether or not Bush took this nation to war in self-defense, his so-called preemptive strike. Hussein was an imminent threat to the security of this country because of his weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, Bush struck first in self-defense. If he could prove that at his trial, the verdict would be not guilty because it would be a justifiable killing. But if the prosecution could prove, no, you didn't take this nation to war in self-defense, Mr. Bush. You took this nation to war under false pretenses, on a lie. And if the prosecutor could prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, as I'm very confident that I've laid out the evidence for him to do so, then all of these killings of American soldiers in Iraq would become unlawful killings. And being unlawful killings, we're talking about murder.